Hello everyone, I am Becky B. the Book Dragon, and happy Valentine's Day. Unfortunately, I can't really see the little heart necklace, but I'm wearing it. So we all could definitely use a lot more love within the last month and a half. And I'm here today to go over the book that I read within about 3 days. This is Donuts and Other Proclamations of Love by Jared Reck, just in time for Valentine's Day. This surprisingly was a very, very beautiful story. As many of you know, that I do book reviews. They're more like story explorations, rather. I definitely would give this one 5 out of 5 stars. The cover got me as aesthetically pleasing. The story went at a really good pace. I actually enjoyed reading it. There were some surprising twists and turns that I was not expecting. Has anyone else read this beautiful story, or have you read other love stories for the month of love? Because it's Valentine's Day, so why not? This story is about, this actually marks off one of the challenges for the PopSugar Reading Challenge of 2025, a story about a food truck. Well, as you can see, there's the food truck. Has anyone actually ate from a food truck before? I have a few times at the LA Festival of Books. And last year at the Huntington for their Strange Science exhibition and theatrical spectacle in such a way. And so that's what I'm going to be going over today now, since it says donuts, one of my favorite desserts. This has to do with a Swedish food truck and the owners that run it. It is a grandson and his grandfather. So speaking of donuts, why not grab your favorite dessert, or in this case, grab your favorite donuts, a pot of tea, and come join me while I go over this well-worthy story. Stay tuned. It's not a food truck without a menu, so that is the first thing you see. And you'll notice it says Rulle kebab and Munkar. So Munkar is the Swedish word for donuts. This, because it has to do with Swedish food, you'll definitely be learning a lot of the country's language in here. I was very surprised. And so these ones are flagged on the side, which means these are the ones that I have yet to write. But the ones at the top, I'm going to be going over the particular highlights that I took away from it and that I could definitely expand upon. So, first of all, the main character in the story is Oscar Olsson. And his grandfather is known as Farfar. And Farfar's real name is Eric Olsson. And they run a food truck called, and I really hope I say it right, called Hedgehedge. And do forgive me if I say it wrong. Hedgehedge, Rulle kebab, and Munkar. And so they've been running this food truck for a while now. And this is Oscar Olsson's senior year in high school. So imagine being a high schooler and helping to run a business at the same time. That's a lot of pressure, not only from the business, but also there's academic studies as well. So Oscar Olsson is a cooking protege. Because of what he's been able to do, he's actually made a lot of great friends at school and from elsewhere. And so you know very, very little about them at the beginning, but as the story unfolds, little pieces of history, of Farfar's history and of Oscar's family history slowly begin to unfold. So what goes on in the story? According to what the blurb says, it says here, while his friends prepare for college, Oscar decides his future is working with his grandfather on their food truck, Hedgehedge. But when Oscar unexpectedly gets his first taste of adulthood, he realizes his plans may be half-baked. There's another student at the school that they're not really on the same page. And Oscar, what it says here is he hates school. He wants it to be over and done with. He's like, once I'm done with school, I'm going to run the food truck business, and that is it, period. But he makes Munkar, which is donuts and other Swedish delicacies, and that's his big plan. But then suddenly there's another student named Mary Louise Messenger, aka Lou, L-O-U, who is the complete opposite. She is an academic. She is basically a school scholar for a high school student, and she has her eyes on University of Pennsylvania. So AP, she's in the Girl Scouts, and I believe from looking back at the story, she's also on the student council. So suddenly, Lou hijacks Oscar's carefully crafted schedule of independent studies and blocks of time in the culinary lab. Oscar is roped into helping Lou complete her overambitious resume-building service project, reducing food waste in Central Adams High School. So she's on a mission to not only earn points to get an award for Girl Scouts, but she's actually taking it a step further, reducing food waste. So, well, what exactly is the problem? As we go further on in the story, you will realize how much of the food waste the students are actually creating without even realizing it. So I'm just going to read a little bit of this passage to kind of get you understanding that Oscar Olsson, the grandson, who's in his senior year, is being raised by Eric Olsson, his grandfather, known as Farfar. Farfar has a nickname for Oscar, and he calls him Gubbin, and Gubbin means old man, but he's referring that to his grandson. It's sort of like a pet nickname. Here's what we find out. I know I was born there, lived in Maryland as a little kid, briefly with my mom and dad, but mostly with Farmore. But I only have a few fuzzy memories of it. Farfar was already here in America, in Gettysburg, into his second life as a food truck entrepreneur with Amir. So there's a few of these characters we're like, okay, who was Farmore? Who was Amir? And that's when we realize, oh, he was basically raised by his grandfather. We don't know what happens to his parents. And so he says, I was too young to understand that it was Farmore's turn to claim a new life. That sometimes there's a limit to how long a person can live in the aftermath of things beyond her control. So what's happening here? Farfar left his family behind to start a life anew here in America, where he meets Amir. So Farmore, I'm guessing, was the wife or another relative that he had left behind. So, but that was an interesting passage. Sometimes there's a limit to how long a person can live in the aftermath of things beyond her control or beyond his control. What Farfar did is that he uprooted himself, not his entire family, to start anew in America. It's not until the day of his son's death that he's called back to Maryland and told, hey, you have a 4-year-old grandson and I cannot raise him on my own. What do we do? So Farfar decides to take Oscar and has sole custody of him. So Oscar is basically raised by his grandfather. That's all that he knows. And I know that there are many of you who have been raised outside of your biological parents. Some of you may have been adopted. Some of you have been raised by foster parents. Some of you have been raised by your grandparents, by aunts and uncles, or even by a family friend. And some of you, boy, during the COVID pandemic, it was a huge travesty to families everywhere. And suddenly, I was watching on the news on how many of these parents just dropped dead from this disease. And the eldest of the siblings was there to raise them. It's hard to fathom how many of the siblings became the parent. This chapter 3, it has an interesting chapter. It's called Paper Bags Hold More Than Groceries. They're to have 3 items in their bag that says something about them. Find out who you really are with the 3 objects. Oscar was the first to do the speech, and he produces the 3rd item, which is another bag full of Munkar. Munkar is the Swedish word for donuts. A single donut is a munk, and Munkar is a baby donut. And so this is where he starts talking about his plans that he wants to be able to help run the business of their Swedish food truck. And another student, one of his friends, I believe this is Jorge. Let me just make sure. Yeah, Jorge. Jorge and Jesus are the athletic twins. They're like the top basketball players of the team. And so this was, I thought there's at least a page and a half that I'm going to read from this one. My abuelo first came to this area as a migrant worker decades ago to pick apples. He'd go from one orchard to the next and send money back to his family in Mexico. Jorge glanced at me then and grinned. He still brags about how fast he was. Eventually, he found a way to stay permanently, took the nastiest job ever conceived, slinging parts at the turkey processing plant over in New Oxford. 60 hours a week. Over 20 years, all to give my papi and his brothers a better life here. My abuelo eventually was able to bring his whole family back with him. My abuela and their 3 sons, all 3 coming here to Central Adams speaking no English. Papi was in 6th grade. He doesn't talk about it much, but I know it was hard. But if my abuelo was willing to sling turkey parts 60 hours a week, Papi was willing to work hard to get through school. And when he graduated, abuelo made sure he understood that he could go for more. So my dad enrolled at the community college to learn plumbing. And when he started his own business a few years later, Jorge held up his second item, an old wrench, frayed duct tape around the handle. Abuelo bought him his first set of tools. I know none of this really has been about me, but this is who I really am. He flashed another grin in my direction. I am the product of generational sacrifice. People whose dreams had nothing to do with their personal aspirations, but who were willing to wish on the possibility of more decades into the future. So my dream, Jorge said, smiling his brilliant smile at everyone before reaching into his paper bag for the last item number 3, is to become a doctor and to have my abuelo see me graduate from medical school. I love this part here because since you know who took office, ICE raids have been on the rise. People are being searched. People are being dragged from their homes. People are being deported. And it really just, because they are undocumented immigrants, they're not legal citizens, but they have come here to make their lives better. And there's a discrepancy as to figure out, well, who are the real citizens coming here versus those who come here, join a gang, and then commit the worst crimes. My aunt, who passed away I think it was last year. She was the first of her family to graduate from nursing school, and she also comes from a Hispanic background. She was raised Catholic. I was raised Jewish. So to have the two religions being combined and separate in the family it almost tore our family apart, but she made sure that, that her family embraced ours, and that's what made her a standout. But when you look at, children today who are the children of undocumented immigrants who were born here, according to our Constitution, they are citizens. They are U.S. citizens if they're born here. And now they're being taken away because their parents were not documented. This one passage here made me really think about, the immigrants that came over from Europe during the Russian pogroms. Many of the Americans here at the time did not want anything to do with new people coming in. At one point, there was a stop to all of that, and it cost many of them their lives. But I just love the fact that he was talking about how his papi was willing to work 60 hours a week to make it, and then still put himself through school, so that when he reaches in for each item told about that generation and what they worked for. So his papi worked at a turkey factory so that he could bring his family here. The next son started his own plumbing business, and now for Jorge and Jesus, Jorge especially, he wants his dream, his future lies in a stethoscope that he holds as the third item. I love that term, generational sacrifice, because that definitely tells about what it takes to start life anew. When you uproot your family from one country to go to the next where things could be better, where they do see a future here rather than over here. It makes you really, really question, what are we doing now? What is, why did we allow this person in the White House to start taking away those rights of immigrants who come here to start a better life for them, for their families, and to see a future for the next generation? If that is not generational sacrifice, I don't know what is. But as we go further on in the story, we understand why Farfar left suddenly. So let's continue. During the paperback speeches, we also learn about Mary Lou Messenger and a student named Bryce, and he will play a significant part in the story too, one that I didn't see coming until much, much later in the story. So Lou is, producing her merit badges and her PSAT scores and all about her Girl Scouts, and Bryce kind of put a little wrench in the paperback speech here when he says, pulling out a Confederate flag patch from his bag, how his grandfather was a reenactor of the battlefield, and how some people mistook it for a hate symbol. For his family, it was about heritage. But little do we know at the beginning that they took it as more than just heritage, as we are to find out later. So then this next page here, this mentions something about audiobooks being counted as books to be read by students, because in schools you're expected to read textbooks that they give you, or that because you will usually see the books on the shelves that you are to read, whether it could be a novel study or even a play study. So this was interesting. This is Oscar speaking. All of this is told from his perspective, so it's in first person. Mrs. Cunningham was the only teacher I'd ever had who counted audiobooks as reading, and she figured out what Farfar had years before. If you let me alone with the page, I'd drown in the letters swimming across the surface. But if you let me hear it, gave me something to do with my hands while I listened, I retained all of it. I finished 42 novels, audiobooks, that year, and for the first and only time ever, had a teacher call me a reader. I'm not one of those people that can listen to audiobooks while I'm doing something, especially if I become so engaged in it, I can't be doing anything else with my hands. I said this in the interview with Dr. Kathleen Walls. I don't want to be in my car listening to a story with my eyes here and then my mind somewhere else trying to concentrate, where is the story going. I have to be sitting still with the physical book in my hand and read it. I think that should be an option, because a lot of teachers don't. They don't count audiobooks as reading material, because you're supposed to read. Not every student is your dedicated reader, because there are some students who are dyslexic. They can't. To them, the words on the page are just a jumble of these letters, like he said, swimming on the surface. Who knows? And that's not their fault. So that's something to consider. Mrs. Bixler, I believe hers is the culinary lab class, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. She says, Mrs. Bixler's big on floundering. She says, you only really learn by screwing up. And there's an awful lot of that in the kitchen. One of the modules I taught my students was, if you want to get into college, learn to fail. Students are taught the opposite. We are not taught to fail. And because we have been kind of brainwashed in a way, once we enter school, that we are not allowed to fail. But how do you learn if you don't fail? So I remember in community college, I flunked biology. The teacher was great. To me, it was like learning Greek, and there were certain things in biology that I just didn't get, and I flunked. And that, college students, if you fail a class, you go on probation, which means you have depending on the school's policy, you can have maybe 3 to 6 months only to get that grade up, and you have to repeat the class. The colleges are really kicking it in gear, saying, do not waste your time. Do not waste our time teaching you if you're not going to commit. This chapter talks about how Mrs. Bixler comes to Oscar with the fact that Lou is going to be working with him for this community project. And she says, you won't always be able to just do exactly what you want in the real world. When it comes to the real world, there are organizations that if you, let's say you land the job, or that you land the position that you want or that you weren't expecting, and they're going to expect you to be a team player. If you're not showing that you're a team player, they can fire you. He's learning that, you're almost at adulthood, and you're going to have to start learning that, yeah, you may have gotten away with it as a kid, but as you start to grow up and you start taking on more adult responsibilities, you're not always going to get to do what you want, period. So then on chapter 5, we learn the truth about Mary Louise Messenger. This is where she explains to Oscar and Mrs. Bixler, here's the problem. Nearly 1,000 students go through the cafeteria lunch line each day, hundreds more for breakfast. I spoke with the custodians on duty in the cafeteria. Their rough estimates are that more than half the students throw their apples away, unopened, every time they're served, which, looking at the school lunch menu, is roughly twice per week. With these conservative estimates, just using lunch, mind you, of 500 apples per day, twice per week, we throw away roughly 1,000 apples, over 4,000 apples in a month. So then, Lou comes to Oscar with a question. What could you do with 4,000 apples a month? So, because of his open time schedule, he decides to create apple donuts, apple crisps, and later on, healthy apple muffins for students to grab on the go. He's not expecting her to be there every single day, but he doesn't try to trouble his grandfather about it too much. So then as the chapters go on, when he is making the apples, everyone is surprised that there are that many apples left over. On this page is where she explains what she is trying to help the community understand by having them care about the environment and not just about the fact that the food that they waste is becoming part of the problem. Did you know that food waste, like these apples, releases methane when it decomposes in a landfill, and that as a greenhouse gas, methane is more than 28 times more potent than carbon dioxide. But it's not just the greenhouse gases from landfills. Think of all the energy wasted along the way, the energy and the water and the resources it took to grow these, the underpaid, often exploited person power it took to harvest them, to transport them, to package them, all of it wasted. And when it pours methane into the atmosphere, we can't even measure the full scale of the damage. She's trying to figure out a way to solve one problem, but then what is the main takeaway? And as we go further and further on, she's there every day. Gubbin, or Oscar, is doing his cooking as usual, and so he basically he's not complaining about it. It puts him to work. That's how the apple Munkar part of the story begins. As I said earlier about the generation before, that when they come here to follow their dreams, it comes as a question. At some point, Lou actually works alongside Farfar and Oscar in the food truck, because they're using all of these apples to their advantage to become part of the food truck menu, and they serve it up to the students every day, to the teachers, and so on and so forth. So it's at this point that Lou really starts taking an interest in Farfar's background. And so she was surprised, and so was Oscar, because Oscar has never, it's interesting how the younger generation often say, I never thought to ask my grandparents this. I never thought to ask my parents these questions. But Lou, that's what she's all about. She asks the questions. Farfar was a civil engineer in Sweden, and I'm not sure what this word is here in Åland. I've never seen this before. It looks like a capital A with a tiny circle over it. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce it really, but this is where he starts to really open up. When Lou asks him, so what made you decide to come here? Lou looked around, arms out, indicating not just here as in America, but here as in the food truck, where he clearly had a much more prestigious career, one that could have easily transferred across the Atlantic. Just following my dreams, he said. His head down now, his voice quiet. It broke my heart a little watching it. No one should be hiding. Here's that quote. No one should be hiding that much shame and guilt on their faces when the answer is following my dreams. So there is some kind of hidden guilt that he's refusing to let loose. He's kind of really, Farfar is almost afraid to let his guard down, kind of. Here is where Farfar begins to tell a little bit more about the fact that he lost his son, Oscar's dad, to drug abuse. But none of this, he says, in front of Lou after she leaves. It's only afterwards that she learns about it. So he says, I was young when I came here, so lost that for the most part, that for most of our years together, I never even thought, here it is, I never thought to even ask that question. Here was just where we lived, and in my limited memory, things had fallen apart where I lived before. My mom was gone before I was even a year old. Found a job on a cruise ship, a big industry there, and never came back. My dad was a mess. As a little kid, once I was here with Farfar, here was just home. Here. Where else would you be, right? As a little kid, you don't have that sense, those layers of before and before and before. Can you imagine the children that have been recently uprooted from their country and raised here when they were babies, when they were toddlers? They don't have the history of the layers before that. This was about Farfar and Amir. At that point, I didn't know if Amir was a cousin or if he was a friend, or if he was, at first, I thought Amir was a brother to Farfar at the way it was being discussed. He's never told me much about Amir. I don't know if it's too hard or what scares me, honestly. He really didn't intend for those two worlds to ever overlap. Maggie's told me, though, I wish I could have seen it, even if the idea is too weird for Farfar. I don't believe in soulmates, Maggie said to me just recently. There's not one perfect match for you out of the 8 billion on this planet. Relationships take work. It takes time and energy and patience and forgiveness and more patience to maintain love over a lifetime. But I've never seen any two people make it look as effortless as Eric, aka Farfar, and Amir. Even at this point in the story, I was like, are they talking about brothers? Are they talking friends? Two people make it look as effortless. Like their relationship it didn't take a lot of effort. It was just there. That's what Maggie is telling Oscar. But here's where I love this quote. Relationships take work. They really do. And some relationships just do not pan out. They go through phases and stages, and it's about maintaining them even more further on. So yeah, there's Rhonda and Maggie, and they're all discussing about the apples and Oscar's way of cooking, making something out of something that is being discarded. 4,000 apples a month. And Lou, again, is she's basically part of Oscar's life at the moment, in not just in school, but also in somewhat of family matters. And people couldn't stop talking about it at dinner that first night. Everyone laughing and talking over each other about favorite desserts and what their grandmothers made when they were kids. Here's the quote: stories. Everyone wants to tell their stories. Have you ever asked an elder or a grandparent or your parent on what kind of food they grew up eating? Was there any kind of traditional recipe that their mothers or even their fathers would make? My mother, I have yet to master the way that she makes chicken soup. And my dad was raving about it. He says, your chicken soup beats my mother's. So no one can make stew or flanken like my dad. They are so good. They are just so delicious. And it's interesting hearing what my mom used to have at her house. On my mother's side of the family, they were definitely, on her grandmother's side, Orthodox. All Orthodox Jews. And they kept kosher in the house. When my mother, she was growing up, she was born in the 50s. And at that point, there were packaged foods and frozen foods. And so I remember some of the recipes she was telling me about. The macaroni with Velveeta cheese, and how her mother would cook it on the stovetop with real butter, the real stuff. On my dad's side, I was very surprised to learn that my grandmother, bless her soul, my dad said she cooked bacon. I beg your pardon? What do you mean she cooked bacon? She even made ham. I'm looking at it going, Dad, hold on a minute. We're Jewish and your mother cooked bacon? He says, food was food. She cooked the way she wanted it, and no one was going to argue with her. This is something that she told me before she passed away. She says, it's good to be Jewish, but don't let Torah rule your life. She was a modern woman, a modern day woman, and she did things her way, and no one was going to tell her otherwise. So at this point, Oscar is just getting he doesn't like the fact that his plans have now been put on the back burner in order to help Lou out. But the fact that Lou is spending so much time with Farfar and Oscar at the food truck, Farfar really enjoys her company. Oscar is just, he finds her annoying. She's kind of a nag sometimes. And he doesn't really understand why she's there. And so Farfar tells him, if you really hate her so much, Gubbin, I will look for someone else to help. The fact that Lou is so fast at numbers, and because she has really great academic merit, she's able to actually take orders from the customers at the food truck even faster. But that is one of the first things you will learn, Gubbin. One of the first things I learned from Amir, how hard it is to find good help. It's like, yeah, we run the food truck, but do you know what I do afterwards once you leave? He says, it is not a fantasy, Gubbin, just driving around making donuts and making people happy. No. Do you know what to do with the wastewater from the truck? How to dispose of and replace the fryer grease? Do you know how to fix the engine if the truck breaks down, Gubbin? Do you even know how to change a flat tire? So, do you know how to order more supplies and ingredients, Gubbin? To do the bookkeeping, to do the taxes? Do you have any idea how to pay taxes, Gubbin? Oscar is just looking at Farfar going, what are you trying to do? Squash on my dreams? It's like, I know all about this, and I will get to it, like, someday. And Farfar is saying, yes, there is so much to learn, Gubbin. I know you're ready to take the food truck out every day, but you only see the plus side of it. You have to see what really goes on into running a food truck. All of this is what it takes to run a food truck business. So when Oscar tells him, that's my whole point, Farfar, why aren't I learning any of this instead of stupid school? Because Oscar hates school to a T. He hates it. And then Farfar tells him straight out, because you must finish school, Gubbin. Non-negotiable. This food truck is not a sure thing. This is not a guaranteed living. And I do not want you to be stuck, Gubbin, if something happens. I've looked into it, Gobin. I like to know the options. I like to do the research. It is important to know these things to be aware of different possibilities. You have to think of it as an investment in your business, in our business, Gobin, to ensure your plan works and to have options if it doesn't. It is investing in your future, Gobin. The next chapter, a few chapters in, I didn't really flag a lot of these pages down, but in chapter 11 is where we learn something a little bit different about Lou and how serious she really is. And this was sort of like a little, kind of like something that kind of came out of left field in the story. Lou is teaching the class how to administer the drug Narcan for an overdose victim. And Bryce, being the usual outlandish and outspoken behavior, he just thinks that administering this to them is a joke. The same people ODing and getting saved and then wasted again. I mean, if people want to waste their lives, let them. And she tells him no. Addiction is a disease. I doubt you'd say the same thing about cancer. So she and Bryce almost have like a real ugly debate. Oscar learns what it means to change a flat tire. He understands that doing taxes, as Farfar calls it, is doing sexy math. And then, of course, the rumors start going around that, Oscar and Lou are sort of becoming a thing. Oscar and Lou are letting people know, no, that is not it. We are classmates, we're doing this project together, and that's it. When Lou presents her demonstration of the apple situation with Oscar with her as her partner to demonstrate, she says, take a bite, see if you notice anything. So each of the school board members take a bite of the apples that they use for the cafeteria, and they want to immediately spit them out. They're like, what is up with these apples anyway? What's going on? Aren't these our apples? Where are they being shipped from? She said the apples that are being shipped to the school are from Washington State, from the West Coast. So imagine all those apples taking, 4 or 5 days to get from Washington State up here to Washington, D.C. over here. They lose their taste by the time they get to the school. That's when they decide, okay, we're going to start using our own resources. We're going to select and gather the apples from our local farmers here, and we will use those for the school. And suddenly that's when they start to see a change. And so at this point, Oscar, someone has eyed him, this girl named Skylar. Skylar fawns over Oscar a lot more than Lou gives him credit for. And again, Oscar is wondering, well, what the heck is Lou doing, wasting her time with me, which she can be with someone else that she can fawn over, rather than me being here as her go-to. So Farfar has a little talk with Oscar, and he says, just be careful, Gubbin. Relationships can be tricky, especially if you're not sure of things. So the twins, Jorge and Jesus, are they played their last game of the season, and then from there, they're going to go on to different colleges. He says they made it farther than any team in school history, and what they'd accomplished was incredible. But it was surreal to be just a few minutes on the other side of it. That story was over, and it was like we still had our hands on the back cover of the book. Like they didn't want... It's like, oh my gosh, this is it. This is senior year of high school. This is the last game of the season. This is the last prom. All this is part of the story before this story ends and another story begins or another chapter begins. So that's interesting to see that story element of what Oscar was thinking about. And this is where a lot of high schoolers, I know that I thought about this too. What's next after graduation? It's like, oh boy, this is the real world. Am I prepared for it? Because it's like, once you turn 18, you are considered a legal adult and no one is there to tell you what to do. If you're not prepped and you still act other than your age, or rather how you're supposed to behave as an adult by the time you get to that point, by the time you get to that age, others will then step in and say, no, you're not ready. And they will start disciplining you instead of your parents or instead of your family members too. This is where he expands the thought about relationships need a work. He says, if there's one thing I've learned from Farfar about relationships is that it matters that you're sure about things. Even before he ever said those words to me, that there are serious consequences if you're not. If you just go along with what you think you're supposed to do. And that's why a lot of relationships do not work. They do not continue. It's like you could be, it comes to that old, I don't know if I would consider it a type of cliche, the cheerleader who falls for the quarterback. It becomes the formula for how your life as a high school student should go. You need to be the popular person. You need to fall for the most popular person who is a sportsman. That's changed. So there are serious consequences if you're not sure about the relationship, and that's why it's good to ask questions from both partners. Every individual celebrates tradition in their own way. They could take it from generations before, and then they could make new traditions. So this I thought was an interesting chapter. This is chapter 23, where it says, enter I really hope I say it right, Pumpa Monk. He says here, honestly, after the year that I'd had to that point, I was relieved to get back to a routine that was just ours. So this is Oscar and Farfar's thing. It's just the two of them, as it was before Lou came into the picture and everything else in between. Thanksgiving doesn't really exist in Finland or Sweden, duh. And with just the two of us here, we'd always kind of done our own thing. Even Maggie and Juliet leave town for the day to go to Juliet's sister's house out in western Pennsylvania somewhere. Lilla Yule was our day. This is where Farfar talks about Amir and what happened with Oscar's parents. Amir had an accident. It was in a car accident. And Amir seemed fine, but they didn't realize that he had internal bleeding, and he ends up dying of an aneurysm. But still, we're not quite sure who Amir really is. And Lou is listening to this as Farfar is explaining. So, and Lou, because she's gotten so used to hearing the stories about the Olsson family, she begins to really, I don't want to say cuddle up, but it's almost as if she looks at Farfar as a second grandfather. And she and Oscar are both learning about this at the same time. So she says, and Farmer, Dad's mom, right? Farmer is, yes, she's still alive, still in Marianne. And she was my wife, yes, 24 years before I left. So now we know that Farmer was married to Farfar in Marianne. He says, and that was where I could see the guilt painted rose at the outer edges of his cheeks, his ears like mine. Trying to be honest, to fill in the actual details of the story. He was married 24 years, had one child, a son named Philip, a son who later fell into drugs, battled addiction, and after he thought his son had won the battle, Farfar dropped a bomb on it all and left. I could have filled those pieces in for him. Tag in and finish the story, but my voice was still on lockdown, and Lou had all the patience in the world to hear it from Farfar's mouth. A little later on, when they're talking about the dad, Lou discovers that Oscar's father died of a drug overdose. Oh, God. Lou held a hand to her mouth, then instinctively to the end of her braid pulled in front of her right after Amir. Yeah. Philip had some problems when he was your age, drugs. But I thought he moved past him by the time I left. I thought he was better. He was. Oscar then fills in. He overdosed. I was 4. I don't really remember any of it. It was all too much loss for Linnea. Too much to ask of her. To continue raising Oscar on her own, at the time it was too much. I took custody, even though I'd only known Gubin for a few days. Even though I was terrified it would be a disaster. Oscar notices that Lou looks at Farfar in a whole new light. And she continues to stare at Oscar like she's learning something about him for the first time. We don't know exactly why that is until later. During, I think it was a little bit earlier in the chapter, Lou's parents and her brother come to one of the meets. Her brother's not really much in the picture. He rarely speaks. He doesn't really want to be there. And we don't know what happens. We don't know how much Lou is connected to Farfar or Oscar's story until much later. I mean, is it possible that maybe some people just match chemically? Is there like actual chemistry behind people having chemistry? Do some of us just align, taste? I cannot think of that. I cannot say that word. Budularly? I'm not quite sure if I'm even saying it right. Is that the scientific explanation for soulmates? So he's like, Skylar loves me to a T, but that celery breath, no, can't handle it. And then he tells her, he breaks up with her in the car, and she brushes it off like it's nothing. And she leaves. So at this point, Lou has been telling Oscar that she has applied to all of these colleges. She didn't get into any of them. She didn't get into the one of her choice, and she is so broken down, and she doesn't know what to do. And Oscar is there to witness it. Way earlier, Oscar hears Lou talking to Mrs. Bixler. It's like he doesn't really care for his future, she tells Mrs. Bixler. And he's wasting it. He's wasting all of it on this one thing that he knows he is never going to be able to get out of. Oscar believed at that point that Lou was talking about him. Here they had been working together. They had gotten on swimmingly as partners, but then to hear that, he couldn't let it go. So when Skylar comes on to him, he doesn't mind it at all. He's got someone else who can fawn over him, and maybe Lou will start, slowly separating herself. But no, Lou latches on even more to Farfar and Oscar's food truck business. Oscar lets Lou have it. This is where some of this language gets a little bit ugly. Yeah, I get it. I don't care about my future. And Lou is just looking at him completely flabbergasted at his words. He's just asking her, what the bleep are you doing here in my life? If you think I'm wasting it, then why are you wasting your time with me? And at that point, emotions are running high. And so Lou leaves in a huff. She's crying. She doesn't want to have anything to do with Oscar. And Mrs. Bixler, who was kind of looking at the two of them going, this is like, they're the upcoming golden couple. They're working on well together. What just happened? Some of Oscar's friends, when he's complaining about this to his friends, they're saying, she wasn't talking about you. She was talking about her brother. Lou's family was out of town. I didn't know how to explain it all to Farfar, how I flipped out on her on one of the worst days because I was convinced she lived in constant judgment of me. How my relief that wasn't the case was coupled with the realization that her family had been ripped apart, just like his, by drugs. And that honestly, she'd witnessed it more closely and intimately than either of us had. For what I could guess, she'd brought her brother back from the dead at least once. Maybe more than that. It's disturbing that you still see the war on drugs, the war on drug abuse. And what is even scarier is that I've seen these YouTube videos of these, most of the time I would think it's homeless people that are on drugs. But when you have someone with a camera who specifically goes to those places to record, hey guys, here's the real drug problem. They're so addicted to it that they're looking at the disease, the actual living human disease from individuals themselves who have OD'd and who are in the stages of addiction and drug rejection. They have such difficulty getting off of the drug that their body is not allowing them to reject it at all. It's like their body is craving more. He apologizes to her. They start anew, and it's the beginning of the new year. Lou comes to him, and Oscar explains that, I'm not smart, I hate school, I don't want to go to college, and this is where we see the emotion of Oscar just unleashed. And suddenly he and Lou are crying in the classroom, and that's when their friendship blooms into more than just partners. You actually start to see a love grow, and finally it's like, oh my gosh, finally things are looking up. My bookmark was on this chapter, chapter 31, Smithsboro. This is where the story took an unexpected, dark turn. If you guys remember, I was talking about the student Bryce and how Bryce is like the typical male student, all chauvinistic and very much like the suave guy, the guy with all the moves, the guy who is proud of his heritage. Well, this chapter definitely discusses that. There were not just people lined up outside the food truck. The Garland Avenue, named after someone from the Confederacy, was being renamed Unity. But at this particular, I don't know what the name of the festival is, but it was all for the renaming of the street. But there are those who are there to celebrate the new street name, and then you have, here it is, the far right. This is where things start to go wrong. And in the middle of all this is Bryce. Farfar, Lou, and Oscar are watching from the food truck. There's a big riot going on now. You have the Confederate veterans, and then Farfar knows this is going to get ugly. He tells the two of them, stay in the truck. You now have members of not just the Sons of Confederacy, you also have the KKK, the Proud Boys, and American Identity Movement. This car is making its way through the crowd at breakneck speed. People are beginning to scatter. The protest is going completely out of hand. Bryce is stuck in the middle, and Farfar runs in, pushes him out of the way. And Oscar sees his grandfather fly through the air. Sorry for spoiler alerts. So Farfar is hanging on by a thread. He's in hospital, and it's like, this is the only adult that he's ever known. No one else has raised him but Farfar. And so Lou is with Oscar and Farfar. Farfar is hooked up to machines in the hospital. He is not breathing on his own. This is kind of like what I felt when my mom's father was dying. I didn't really get to be there for my dad's father. I saw him one time, and he looked like a rotting vegetable. I hated that image. And to see my mom's father, who was always upbeat and with a smile, I never expected him to be in that same kind of situation. This is what Oscar is witnessing. Stay here, Gubbin. Those were the last words he'd said before, and I just kept seeing that moment over and over, rewind and replay. And I kept thinking, is that it? Are those really the last words I'll ever hear him say? Stay here, Gubbin? I'm still waiting for the answer. Please tell me there's more. And with those images running on a loop in my head, I had to start asking the big question. Now what? So imagine this. Oscar is just about to turn 18. Graduation is coming up. This is the last big festival of the year, and his grandfather was hit by a car and by someone who was on the opposition of the street naming. And this guy just didn't think about the people he'd hurt with his car. And this goes for everyone else. All of these travesties. I mean, I've seen these outrageous. We've all been witness to our current social affairs and a history of these people that drive their cars through parades and people on the sidewalk driving people down. It's like, why? What was the point? Do you know how many lives were connected to that one person? That's what killers do not realize. When you have someone who is full of revenge and they want to get their hands on this person or these people, they want them out of their lives, they don't know that on the opposite end of that picture are families connected, friends connected to that one individual. When a policeman is ambushed, I've seen videos of a whole courtroom of nothing but police officers from more than one precinct, all there to support their fallen officer who was no longer here, and they are there to see the killer cuffed in court. And that criminal, that one individual, it's a good thing that you're behind glass, because you got the whole wolf pack staring at you in the face from every one of those police officers. How about the students that marched for their lives after the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas shooting? What about those at Sandy Hook? People don't know that there are so many people attached to each and every individual. And yeah, he says, this is what I was begging for all of these years, Oscar says, to be done with all the, I'm not going to say the word, and get on with my life. But Farfar was always in that picture. My partner, my mentor, my everything. Was this really my someday? Is it? So, and can you imagine, Oscar he has no one else who is here except for friends of the family. And it goes back to that quote when Farfar told them, you don't really understand how much help you will need, and you don't understand how hard it is to find help. So once this incident takes place and Farfar is hospitalized, Oscar he's going to be on his own if something happens to Farfar. And he just turned 18. I feel for young individuals who fall through the foster system in world countries. I remember reading about one in Russia. I think it was in Russia. This young man who literally, he was still in school and he wasn't finished with his studies, but he was brought up in like an orphanage, and he was in the foster system. But once foster individuals turned 18 in that country, goodbye, you're out of here. You're on your own. You have to be the adult. And the problem is, it's surprising how many of the homeless fell through the foster system early on in life, and they were not taught how to do certain things. Kind of like what Farfar was telling Oscar about the food truck. How do you properly run not just a business, but how much are you willing to invest in this business and continue the course? Suddenly, Farfar is being regarded as a national hero. Beyond the endless footage of the incident itself, some outlets were piecing together bios, some even with photos I'd never seen before of a younger Farfar at different rallies, Amor by his side. A 75-year-old gay immigrant who sacrificed his life to save the life of a young man who may very well have hated him just for being the beautiful man he is. The evil shows up, which it does far too often. Heroes emerge. So finally we realize, oh my goodness, Amor became Farfar's lover in a way that he never saw coming. So Farfar at this point is still is still hospitalized. Oscar thought that that it was going to be hard to find help because the food truck was impounded after the protests because it was just left there. Oscar and Lou get the food truck back, and Oscar has to go back to school. But the teachers are they're going out of their way to make sure that he gets the best of everything, and all they're requiring of him is please make cupcakes. Those are his final assignments. His school, his friends, even Lou, they went out of their way to help Oscar at a time when he needed the help the most. I'm telling you, from chapters 31 to the end, I was just bawling. I couldn't get over how beautiful the story was. So it seemed like to Oscar, this was just one big chapter in his life. The chapter before he turns 18, before graduation, before going off to college. He says, I've only had one chapter of my life. I only know one part. And I've never imagined I could end up with so many more like him. I've always just thought childhood, adulthood done, or school, out of school. How many of us think that we only have one chapter when there are so many? Childhood was a chapter for me. Middle school was a chapter for me, a dark chapter, which I do not like to go over at all, period. High school was a new chapter. And then within high school, I like to call mine the theater chapter. I didn't think it would change my life in such a way, but it did. Then came community college. But then also came a chapter within that time, because about 2 weeks after we started community college, 9/11 happened. And that was a whole new chapter for not just me, but for Americans everywhere. And there's been so many chapters between that up to this point. The reason I flagged this page down was because if you remember what I talked about, Jorge, who, when they did their paperback speech and he brought out, he had the Apple canvas bag from his grandfather. He had the wrench from his father's plumbing business. And then he pulled out the stethoscope for his own future as the first to graduate college and medical school. It says here, our boy Jorge was valedictorian in the end, though. And he gave a speech reminiscent of his paper bag speech back in September. Generational sacrifice, but even better. So can you imagine graduates, high school, college, students of immigrants who came here because they could see their next generation do better, and they saw a future story unfolding rather than if they stayed over here. And that's one of the reasons why I love this book, is because it talks about immigrants. It talks about why these people left their countries, because that chapter ended for a reason. They had to come here. And then you have what it takes to not just become your own individual, but what it takes to run a business. Things do not always go your way, as it was told to Oscar by Mrs. Bixler at the beginning. You have to learn how to make do with what you are given, and otherwise you'll sink. And this book touches more than just about the food truck. Farfar's life is still in question. He's still in the hospital. So he says, it's over. I'm out of school, an adult. So right now, Oscar and Farfar were living in an apartment, and Oscar has managed to continue with what he can with the food truck. This is the day after graduation, when it's like, oh boy, here I am. Hello world. I'm an adult. Help. So now he's taking time to make inventory of what he has to offer, what he has learned up to this point, and what he will have to apply for his future. These last 2 pages I thought were really unique, because they talked about a really interesting subject. It was a little slip of paper from Lou. She gave it to me over a month ago before the festival. It's just the name of a poet she's obsessed with, Shane. I can't pronounce the guy's name. Shane Quakeson. And the title of one of his poems, she said, reminded her of us. Heaven, or whatever. It's about his grandfather, not Oscar's. This is Shane's grandfather. To his grandfather, really, who raised him after things fell apart with his own parents. He talks about his grandfather's belief that heaven would be specific to each person, that each person was different. I don't get through it without crying anymore. Farfar's heaven? His heaven, I think, would be Mario Kart. Game reset, every character and every track, every speed bike and super blooper still in need of unlocking. A monster thick burger, a beer, and an endless stash of black licorice. There's no heartburn in his heaven. His heaven would be Koopa. I didn't mention that Farfar and Oscar have a little furry pet called Koopa, and it's a cat. So his heaven would be Koopa, stretched out on the windowsill in the living room, warming under the sun after dinner. Her purr as he purrs Swedish endearments, that's that word, scratching under her chin in the way she only lets him do. It's amazing how pets react when an owner doesn't come home. You can actually see a change in the animal's behavior. Things that they love doing, they suddenly stop. They fidget, they pant, and that's what happens to Koopa. His heaven would be Amor. And I wonder if in his heaven, our two chapters could have been woven together. If the life he's given me and the life he shared with Amor could have overlapped, I'd be happy to work the window in his heaven, to face the customers waiting in the heat, impatient for a little taste of their own heaven. It breaks my heart a little bit that I might not really know what this heaven would be, because as I'm sitting here crying and smiling over hypotheticals and random junk from my own room, I realize that it's really my heaven, this chapter, this life with him. I will not give away the ending because there is an epilogue. We suddenly see that life goes on for Oscar. And there's a few surprises. Jared Reck, thank you so much for writing this beautiful story. I did not see these twists and turns coming. This is a great story that I believe everyone needs to start reading now. Because I think especially when you read that part about Jorge and his paper bag speech, you will really understand and maybe have a different approach to immigrants that come from another country, even if they are undocumented. But there's a proper way to go about it, and there's a wrong way to go about it. And I have a whole new respect for people who run food trucks. It's basically like, imagine your kitchen on wheels. You have to keep the kitchen clean and sanitized. And it's also, the kitchen in this case is a business. And being a business owner, being your own entrepreneur takes work. I have two brilliant cousins who started their own business, and they had to learn the hard way, but they have amazing, amazing businesses. And I will have their links down below. You can check out Sweet Art Bake Shop, and you can also discover Night of the Living Pets. So they're still going strong. This is what this is that Oscar wants to see. Actually Farfar, this is Farfar's dream for Oscar, is to see the fruits of his labor, but also to learn what it means to finish school and find out, that there are other options than just running a food truck. Because what if plan A doesn't pan out? I remember as a kid, my one goal was to become a Disney animator, but other chapters came in. I needed to finish school before I could even do animation. I had to take prerequisite classes, and I wish I paid attention to those even more, because then maybe my life would have been different. Who knows? And it was not my intention to go into acting. I was surprised as a senior that I was the recipient of some kind of senior award. I was like, oh, I thought it was going to be an award for art. No. I received a certificate of drama. I was surprised. And I thought to myself, oh boy, so what does this mean? Do I give up my dreams of being an artist and animator and switch to acting from here? Or do I stick with my choice and continue? One of the things that I learned when I made my choice to work in animation is, guess what? The truly great animators are the ones who know how to act. There's no way that I would be able to teach in front of a classroom had it not been for taking acting in high school. So that kind of prepared me, and that became my teaching chapter. So, once again, 5 stars for this one, Donuts and Other Proclamations of Love by Jared Reck. And keep on reading my book, Dragons. And I'm going to get off my reading podium now and enjoy these delicious, yummy, gluten-free old-fashioned donuts, mini ones. And I hope you guys enjoy Valentine's Day and keep the love spreading and continue to be resilient readers. I will see you all next time. My heaven right here. I'll see you guys later.